Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Educate, enlighten, entertain, with your host, Lillian Cauldwell. And on today's episode of Lest We Forget Historical, we're going to talk about the First Amendment. I know there are a lot of amendments, more than 10 in the U.S. Constitution, but the First Amendment is the most important because it is our free speech. In other words, it gives us the opportunity to speak our mind, to say what we think, our opinions, our perspectives, without getting thrown into jail or worse, shot. And yet, with the upcoming presidential election, there are now some waves, high waves, that are coming in that one, if not paying enough attention, is going to be shocked at what is being said. Case in point, the potential Republican presidential candidate, Donald Trump, came out and said last week that he thought that anybody who criticized the Supreme Court ought to be thrown into prison. Listen up, folks. They used to do that, throw you into prison when you did speak your mind. So, what is the First Amendment, and why is it so important to the very fabric of our country, free speech? Before we were given the right to vote, people who disagreed with the government, local, state, city, federal, were thrown into prison, often for a very long time, when the government disagreed with their views. We could almost say it's the equivalent of being a conscientious objector, when a person would tell the draft board and the military they did not believe that fighting was going to solve their problem. And they were either conscientious objector status, which meant either they went to prison for their beliefs, or some of them claim medical and therefore religious, and avoided going and serving in the military altogether. However, as a conscientious speech objector, you don't get options. You were just thrown into prison. And in some countries across the pond, as we fondly call the Atlantic Ocean, they were shot because it was against the law for them to speak out their mind. Near the end of World War I, the great Union leader, Eugene Debs, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for giving a speech opposing the draft, and his conviction was upheld by unanimous Supreme Court. In 1951, Senator Joseph McCarthy, of the infamous McCarthy era, he was ramping up his witch hunts against suspected communists. And the Supreme Court threw their weight behind Mr. McCarthy, and several individuals who did nothing more than to try to organize a Communist Party in the United States at that time were also in prison. The suspension and suppression of free expression wasn't restricted to unpopular political ideas. Under the federal Comstock Act, made it a crime to mail anything, quote unquote, for any, quote, any indecent or immoral purpose, unquote, and similar state laws, anti-sex crusaders prosecuted authors, artists, booksellers, and art gallery owners alike for distributing anything that touched on the topic of sex. Anthony Comstock, the Comstock Act's namesake, once charges against a gallery owner for selling a reproduction of Alexander Gabinel's, quote, Birth of Venus, unquote, a masterpiece of a nude painting that currently hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. All that is to say is how important the First Amendment really is. We take it for granted. We have to whatever we want to say, especially what we considered our freedom of speech and the press. But they really didn't exist as long as those that they did. They certainly did not come up when the original Constitution was put together and written. The Supreme Court didn't enforce that amendment until the 1960s. Holy cow, something you probably never knew. When it handed down a pair of decisions protecting political agitators and guaranteeing freedom of the press, another thing that we take so blithely for granted. And the protections enshrined in those decisions could easily disappear overnight if the court loses its current pro-speech majority. Something for you to think about before the election. The good news for the proponents of free speech is that based on the court's most recent First Amendment decision, it does appear to have a 6-3 majority the post-1960 understanding of that First Amendment. The bad news, and there's always a yin and a yang, ladies and gentlemen, is that there are 3 justices willing to drastically shrink the protections offered by that amendment. And those 3 could easily swell to 5 if former President Donald Trump gets to appoint more justices to the court. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, one member of the free speech majority, is now 70 years old. Chief Justice John Roberts, another member of that majority, will turn 70 shortly after the next president is inaugurated. And there's always some risk that any justice could experience a catastrophic health event that forces them off the court. So what does that mean for the United States of America? Well, from a personal viewpoint, it means that A, we're not living up to our democratic principles, and B, we will fall from being king of the mountain for democracy. Much Rome fell from their king of the mountain position when they fell from being a republic to being ruled by one man who believed he was the son of the various gods. In fact, one of them made his horse a god, and pretty much suppressed what he did not want to hear or he did not like to hear. And since one of the candidates very famous for his intense dislikes of people, it will be a witch hunt, ladies and gentlemen. And it'll make the witch hunts in Europe look pale by comparison. At the court's right flank stand 2 justices, Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch, who have openly called the New York Times the fount of press freedom in the United States to be overruled. Trump also called for Sullivan to be overruled in a 2020 court filing. Meanwhile, Justice Samuel Alito, in a pair of objections joined by Thomas and Gorsuch, spent the last 2 years unsuccessfully fighting in favor of laws that seem designed to change the modern understanding of free speech. Question: are you interested in losing your freedom of speech? Are you interested in being muffled by city, state, and federal governments not speaking your mind? Will you be afraid to open your mouth and say things unless you're a favorite of the dictator in charge? This is a lot to think about. How are you going to talk to your children if you're afraid they're going to report you to the government for expressing what you believe in or who you believe in? Or maybe you don't, that your children don't like the way that you are talking to them or punishing them. Do you want your 5-year-old to report you to the state government because in their view, you're not being a good parent? Something to think about. You have to remember that these are laws. Laws can be dropped. Laws can be erased. Laws can be broken. They are not written in stone, unlike the 10 Commandments. So, these laws that I have spoken about are just two of the many state laws enacted after Trump left office that challenged the court's post-1960 understanding of free speech in Florida, and the other state Don't Say Gay law, which is eventually weakened by a legal settlement, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, quizzical battle with Disney, and a law targeting drag shows. So this is something one needs to think about. And we're going to stop here, ladies and gentlemen, and continue next Friday, the second Friday of October, and discuss the two competing visions of what free speech really means. I want to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and beginning to understand what the freedom of speech means to you, your constituents, and also what will happen if you lose the ability to speak your mind, because a law is a law. And if you break it, you can be fined millions. Have your own freedom taken away by being imprisoned in your own house or thrown into a jail facility. You can see and view this video of We Forget Historical all over again over on youtube.com/@passionate-world radio. You can also see it at https://passionateworldtalkradio.com/blog. And you can also see it on our social media, facebook.com/radio, linkedin.com/Lillian Cauldwell, and all our other social media networks. This program, Lest We Forget Historical, is brought to you by two sponsors. The first one is Ruby AI. It's a winner and approachable. Please try it out at https://exe73.tryrubi.ai. Sign up monthly. The more you invest, the more you get benefit. Earn while you learn. How good is that? The second, the podcast obstacle training course, a 2-month program, day, 1 hour. Please go over to https://educational.passionateworldtalkradio.com/masterclass. Sign up. Is for students in middle school and high school, older students, colleges, university, junior colleges, continuing education, and for those people who are podcasting, beginners, intermediate, and advanced/experts who want to crush the competition. Thank you very much for listening, and remember, stay tuned, because your First Amendment right, the power and freedom of speech, is in peril, and learn how you can protect it.